Welcome back to our third segment, and we're going to talk about the nature of supply. So remember that the supply curve in healthcare is similar to the supply curve in every other business or every other market economy. It's upward sloping, and the law of supply implying that economists have tested multiple times. If prices increase, sellers are willing to bring more quantity of a good or service to the market. So it's an upward sloping curve, just like law of demand indicates that the demand curve is going to be downward sloping because at lower prices, consumers decide to consume or demand more of a given good or service. And when you think about the nature of supply in healthcare, it depends on really who I guess at what point you're talking about it. So if I think about supply, the first thing I think about is the number of healthcare providers in a given area. Maybe the number of hospitals. If I look at the Nashville area, I don't know, there seems to me to be I don't want to say the hospital system is overbuilt, but there seems to be a lot of hospital capacity in that Nashville area, kind of the suburban Nashville area. And also it probably appears to be a large number of healthcare providers. Now, while it looks like, and I don't think it matters whether you're in Nashville or, from my perspective here in Atlanta, when we're talking about supply, if the supply and demand model worked effectively in the healthcare environment, then in the long run, it would, the factors, the invisible hand, again, Adam Smith talked about the invisible hand. So the invisible hand of the market forces in the long run would drive supply and demand. It would clear the market, and you would have an equilibrium price and quantity, at least in the provider community in that Nashville area. Same thing in Atlanta. You would think that it would drive it to equilibrium. And if that's the case, then why can I never get in to see my primary care doc? I mean, to me, the days of calling your primary care doc in the morning and saying, "Hey, I'm not feeling well, can you see me?" Typically, and I have a primary care doc for a reason. I've done research, and I, finally found one that, were taking patients, and one that I liked his medical school degree, and I liked his residency and his internship, and a multitude of factors I liked about him. And I think he's a pretty good doctor. It's just, I can't get in to see him. Last time I called, it was like I think it was on a Tuesday morning, I needed to see him, and it was Monday of the next week before he had an available office visit. I mean, what kind of access is that? So it makes you wonder about supply and demand in the healthcare market. And yes, I understand that medical schools try to control the supply, and they've got credentialing processes, and again, it's the supply of healthcare providers. It's not something that you can turn around in a heartbeat. It's probably like trying to turn around the Titanic, because they're talking about 4 years of undergraduate degree, and then however long medical school is, and then once you get out of medical school, most of them go to a residency or intern, and so you may have, from the time they graduate from high school, they may have 8 or 10 years invested in that medical degree. So you can see how difficult it is to turn that supply of healthcare providers around. But at the same time, from a consumer perspective, I would certainly like to see my provider. I mean, I sign up for a provider to provide me healthcare goods and services in a timely fashion, and I feel like I'm not getting that. And I've talked to several people in the Nashville area, and it's the same with everybody. There just doesn't seem to be enough office visits available. So does that mean that that certain individuals or certain populations or certain pockets of individuals are draining the access so that not everybody has access? And that's something I haven't found the answer to, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's not the same thing in Nashville, the same thing in Chicago or LA or wherever you are. Trying to get in to see a healthcare provider has become more and more difficult. Yeah, they try to shuffle you off to urgent care, but I've only been to urgent care once here in Nashville, once here in Atlanta, and that was the pits. I knew more than the individual who came in and talked to me, and I know just enough to be really dangerous about healthcare. But anyway, I kind of digress a little. But when we're talking about the nature of supply, you're talking about not only the supply of the providers that you go to see, but it's the supply side of the inputs that they use in their medical practice. And so, Dewars talks about suppliers that can include any firm that provides healthcare inputs and outputs. Theory of the firm is profit maximization. So you've got suppliers that are providing medical devices. They're providing electronic medical records. They're providing computers. They're providing technology. They're providing the scales that you weigh on when you go in. They provide the blood pressure cups. So you've got all of those suppliers that are feeding into this healthcare community or this healthcare environment. And all of those suppliers are in the business of generating profits. They're looking at profit maximization. They are keying in on that one of those three pillars of economic thought, that key pillar of self-interest and optimization. And Dewars makes a comment, I think, in the text where it says, healthcare firms do not incorporate profit maximization, but only normal rates of return and profit to remain viable. I'm not sure I agree with that. If you're on, and I know I don't agree with it on the provider side, and I don't agree with it on the health plan side, especially if you're a for-profit health plan that's got stock or shareholders or your equity investors. And even if you are a not-for-profit, not-for-profits are wanting to generate more than a normal rate of return, because as random as the healthcare industry is, you never know when something is going to happen that drains your reserves. So you've always got to be looking at trying to generate as much revenue and as much profit as possible, at least from my perspective. And profit maximization provides models and benchmarks for forecasting supply. Remember, we talked about how difficult it was because of the randomness of healthcare to forecast demand for a provider's office or a hospital, but they've economists have the models that can provide benchmarks and forecasting not only on the provider side but on the health plan side. I've worked for years with managing teams or directing teams that were medical informatics and medical economics, and that was what these individuals, that's what my teams did, is they on the health plan side, they would forecast the potential demand and how much supply was going to be needed. And even on the health plan side, we would share that information with the provider groups, because we depended on those provider groups to be there ready and willing, supplying goods and services when we needed them. So we wanted to help them with their staffing issues, and we would go usually on a quarterly basis. You'd sit down with providers and say, hey, here's where we see it going. We see that there's going to be an uptick. We see that FDA is coming out with this new drug. Are you going to be able to get a supply of that drug so we can ensure that our covered lives or our covered members have access to those drugs? So there's a lot of things that go on in the background that you might not be familiar with, but there is a sharing of information back and forth between providers and health plans to ensure that the consuming population in any market is going to have access to healthcare goods and services. As I said before, the law of supply and demand, it's an upward sloping supply curve. It's a relationship between price and quantity demanded. Output price is endogenous determinant of, the quantity supplied. So it's the law of supply. The higher the price, the more quantity that a provider or a producer is willing to bring to the market. And that's where we're talking about quantity supplied. We talk about quantity demanded on the consumer side. We talk about quantity supplied on the provider side or the producer side. And what happens, and those are, we're not talking about shifts in the demand of the supply curve. When we talk about shifts in the supply curve, that's when the supply curve moves either up or down and changes the quantity that they were willing to supply at any price. And, you've got supply shifters that cause supply to shift. And that's, cost of inputs is one. Input costs go up and down. That supply curve is going to shift in and out. Technology, automation, going to cause that supply curve to shift in and out. Returns from alternatives. Remember, you're looking at opportunity cost. And Dewar in the text used the example again. I think it was a GP in radiology. That individual was looking at his opportunity cost. He was trying to figure out, am I better off taking and renting my building and renting my radiology machine to another provider and just closing down my practice and going to work for a multi-specialty group? You've got seller expectations. What are the expectations of the providers? Do they see that providing healthcare goods and services are going to continue to be a lucrative endeavor going forward? Is there, again, opportunity cost? Is there better alternative use for their expertise? And then you've got natural events. And, you think about, most people think about natural events, especially in agriculture with farming, with, disease and blights and, flooding and, droughts and, but also natural events in healthcare. What happens to the healthcare supply in Florida during hurricane season, or, in the Midwest, there in Tornado Alley when, what's going to happen to that supply of healthcare goods and services when it's needed and those natural events occur. You see it even in the northern states where they don't have so much. California is notorious for earthquakes. You don't have a lot of earthquakes or tornadoes or, hurricanes in the north, but you've got issues with cold. You've got, blizzards and snow. And so all of those, whether you're on the provider side or the payer side, you're trying to take into account, using historical information, trying to take into account on how that it's going to impact the supply curve, either shifting up or down. And then lastly, it's, a supply shifters, the number of sellers. And again, it goes back to, why can't I get in to see my primary care doc if there's supposed to be an adequate number of providers in the Atlanta market? And it may be, again, the same in the national market. Now, the national market, how can you not get in to see your provider if there's supposed to be an adequate number of providers? And then lastly, Dewar talks about exogenous factors or fixed of quantity supplied. There can be technology changes, they can be input prices of production-related goods, size of the industry, weather. And again, now Dewar, even though she doesn't call them supply shifters, she's talking about supply shifters at that point. That's going to wind us up when we're talking about healthcare production, cost, and supply. I think the next lesson, next time you hear me, we're going to talk about the healthcare workforce marketplace and start trying to tie some of this together. And maybe as we work through the workforce market, maybe we answer some of those questions about why we can't get, or why individuals are complaining about not being able to get in to see providers in a timely fashion. I hope you've enjoyed this segment, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you.